I'm going to just list off 10 metrics. Greg is going to say what his thoughts and feelings are on them, and we're just going to run through them. So you ready to start, Greg?
Let's go for it.
Number 1, baseline start and finish variance.
Definitely a metric. Probably the most important one, to be honest, because key stakeholders are going, you said you were going to be done in December. Is that still the case?
Switch gears. Schedule Performance Index, SPI. This is earned value divided by planned value.
I'm always a little nervous with earned value. I come from defense, and earned value is mandated on everything. But it's almost the case of...
You think earned value is going to steal your wallet? What's got you shaking in your boots here? Critical path length index.
So this is essentially a ratio of the float on the critical path compared to how much float there is at the end of the project to get to planned completion or handover. I actually really like...
How about total float?
Well, that's not a project KPI. That's not a project KPI, is it? Like, is this one of these little
That's
trick
why
questions?
we're here at Beyond Deadlines. How about this one? Percent complete.
I think that's a very key KPI, actually. And again, it's a lot of projects don't fail because they get the advanced stuff wrong. A lot of projects struggle because they don't get the basics correct.
We've cruised through a couple of the classic metrics. Do you have anything in the bag that is non-standard that people can use on their projects? What do you got? What do you got in your metric toolkit?
Yeah, I got 3 that I use that I've never seen anyone use, actually.
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction and Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah and I'm a planning and scheduling manager for Intel.
And my name's Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Here at Beyond Deadlines, we aim to give you tactics and strategies that you can implement day to day on your projects. Today, we're diving into metrics, and some folks even call these KPIs. That stands for Key Performance Indicators. Greg's going to be on the hot seat today. Greg, are you ready to get metriced?
I love myself a good metric. It might be one of my most favorite episodes so far.
Oh, wow. Well, I hope you're not going to feel that way when we're done. Folks, we're going to start off today a little bit different. I'm going to just list off 10 metrics that I pulled up from ChatGPT. Greg is going to say what his thoughts and feelings are on them, and we're just going to run through them. So you ready to start, Greg?
Let's go for it.
Number 1, baseline start and finish variance.
Definitely a metric. Probably the most important one, to be honest, because key stakeholders are going, you said you were going to be done in December. Is that still the case? Yes or no? So I'd just say, yep, that is a very good KPI and probably the one you want to put at the front of the report, as long as it's good.
Yeah. That metric needs to have a baseline, which I think is critical. And then I think what you filter out and segregate is also important, because either you are taking, those critical milestones, which I think you're referring to, and running that baseline variance off it, or you want to aggregate that schedule up and just show in certain sections, what are those baseline variances coming as an issue? The 83-page P6 report that just shows every variance to the baseline, probably not going to be too helpful.
No, and actually, you've triggered a thought there. Like, it really depends on how projects are measuring progress. Like, I know some projects that simply use team productivity, where they don't really care about individual milestones. They just care about work being done productively. There's other projects that only care about singular milestones, like completion or power online or something like this. And there's others that care about multiple milestones. I think multiple milestones is a really interesting one. This KPI still holds true, but it's like, okay, well, if you have multiple milestones and you want a single key performance indicator, you would have to weight all of those milestones and then do a weighted variance. But even so, it's a KPI.
I smell some maths. All right, let's switch gears.
I love some maths.
Schedule Performance Index, SPI. This is earned value divided by plan value.
I was going to say this is different from the KPI that a lot of people mistake as SPI, which is your days delivered against planned days delivered. People regard that as it's schedule productivity, but it's not schedule productivity index. They're two different things. I'm always a little nervous with earned value. I come from defense, and earned value is mandated on everything, but it's almost the case of.
You think earned value is going to steal your wallet? What's got you shaking in your boots here?
Well, no, it all comes down, like, there's an element of subjectivity to it.
For sure.
There's an element of subjectivity of what is valuable and what isn't. And as we all know, really in these projects, value is not smooth. Value is integer based. So, like, having half a chip fab doesn't, like, what am I going to do with half a chip fab? But once you turn on the first chip fab, then I'm like, okay, I've actually got an asset that's valuable here. It's almost like building half a house. In reality, it's actually more of a liability than anything else. Like, you can't sell half a house very easily, but you could sell a full house very easily. So I'm always just a bit nervous of anything that's in the earned value management space, because there's no common way of calculating value. Therefore, all of the KPIs that spin off it, like SPI, CPI, we like to think of them as much more accurate and resolute and precise. And actually, I'm like, well, actually, it's built on more opinion than something like a schedule productivity KPI. So it's definitely a KPI. And it's definitely valuable. I just always raise my eyebrow when I see it and think, who wrote the value calculation methodology report?
I've seen over the last couple of years, people reinvent the definition strangely. Non-schedulers, non-people with background, they come in with some other sort of calculation, number of activities completed or something like that. And they call it SPI. And it's just the most confusing thing, because then people start saying it like it's SPI and it's not. It's always been really strange over the last couple of years where I think it's like the takeover of Power BI from reporting, and you can just sit there and type in whatever you want into the field.
Yeah.
Someone calls some sort of metric, oh, this is, schedule performance index. I'm like, nah, not quite. I would agree with you that earned value, to me, I'm always like, I got to do more research. I got to go figure out if they've now cost and resource loaded the schedule. Where did that come from? What do those values make up? When you see that, oftentimes they've just took $100 and they've just peanut butter spread it across, which doesn't really give you anything that's going to be very indicative of what's actually going on. Are they loading actuals back into the schedule? Then you start to increase maybe some of that validity on that metric. But if not, yeah, you're kind of sitting there with it's just more data. All right. Critical path length index. And that is total float plus remaining duration divided by remaining duration. If ChatGPT got that right, Crowd, you can double check us on that. Let us know. I'm not going to look it up right now. So let me know if that definition is actually correct.
So this is essentially a ratio of the float on the critical path compared to how much float there is at the end of the project to get to, I don't know, plan completion or handover. I actually really like this KPI, but I don't. I also don't like. I really like it because it's a very good measure of momentum. You can trend this one, and you can very quickly see if you're heading in the right or wrong direction. It's the equivalent of the distance between your bumper and the car's bumper in front of you. Like if the car in front suddenly rams on their brakes, you can see, oh, I'm approaching real fast the back end of that car.
If you have zero total float in your project, does this metric help at all? It seems to me like this is just, it's not going to help
Well,
out
it
a
does
lot.
if you go. It does if you're accelerating or decelerating.
Hmm.
It depends if you're one is if you allow yourself to have a critical path with different than zero total float, but if your project's in flux, I don't see how you could without adding handlebar activity at the end called acceleration or deceleration. But I'll get on to why I don't like this one is because a lot of project managers don't understand it, which makes it more difficult to communicate with people. And actually, it's not about how it's calculated, it's about its name. A lot of project managers just understand float at the end of the program. So, whilst I would calculate it, I just call it that. It's buffer at end of program. And then you can see that going less or more.
Yeah. I'm going to put this one up on the shelf. I've never really got it, utilized it, or understand it. But you know what? I'm open. Someone come find me and help me change my view on the CPLI. All right. Uh, I've actually heard this in an interview, but how about total float?
Well, that's not a project KPI. That's not a project KPI, is it? Like, is this one of these
Yeah,
little
that's
trick
why we're here at
questions?
Beyond Deadlines. I know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. My vote would
Okay,
be it's not. It is not a. I mean, I guess you could technically consider almost anything a KPI and a metric and measuring the total float, just like we measured the variance. But it's so basic and rudimentary that I
yeah, I
don't
don't know what you'd
know.
see from this.
I mean, you could trend it over time, you know.
Why?
Where you see how much where your total float's going.
I know, I'm
In
kind of asking. So, you and I have this. Power BI has been great for the industry in that it's allowed us to automate a number of report generation and KPI generation. It's also been terrible for the industry because consultants who are paid on a per hour basis will think of 755 additional KPIs that each project needs and then spend 24 weeks implementing them so they get paid another couple of months of consulting salary. And I'm
yeah,
kind of sitting here going, yeah, it's a KPI, but is it answering a real critical question I have about the program? I'm not entirely
see,
sure.
so it does, because if you're looking at, let's say, an upcoming milestone and you have a decent critical path, it will tell you, this is how much total float we have in between when this activity finishes and the milestone or whatever.
If you
So
define it, yes, if you
yeah,
constrain it, if you just go total flow and you're doing it for an entire program, I'm like, if you
yeah,
do
okay.
total flow for this path to this milestone, then I'm more like, okay. Which really, to be honest, if you flip it back, is then I'd be like, why don't you just use the critical path length index KPI?
Ooh, cage match time, cage match
Yeah.
time. One of these days we'll have to get an actual schedule out and like walk through it.
Hmm.
All right. How about this one? Percent complete.
Um. Yeah. I think that's a very key KPI actually. And again, it's a lot of projects don't fail because they get the advanced stuff wrong. A lot of projects struggle because they don't get the basics correct. And some very basic things is, for example, like the baseline variance. Like, when am I going to finish? When do I think I'm going to finish now? Another one is this, which is much simpler than anything earned value management, which is just how far through building that wall am I? Obviously, there's an entire science underneath. Well, what's your appropriate measurement? I'm always a massive fan of the simpler the better. Just count bricks or measure meters or do something very, very simple. And it gives a gauge. It gives a very good gauge. So I say this is absolutely a KPI, and it's a very, very good KPI.
My favorite thing is when I open up that schedule and I ask, hey, how you doing percent complete? And they say duration. Time passes and the percent goes up. What's the problem here, Micah? This one you need to definitely have a good grounding. But I don't know. This kind of smells a little bit like total float to me, where I think if you do things with it and you aggregate it up, it can be a KPI or a metric. But in and of itself, just if I'm imagining myself in an interview and you ask me what's a key metric and I said percent complete, I think that come across a little bit strange to me.
Why?
I think you'd have to explain it a bit more. It's not really like a percent complete is not really like a metric, I would say. But I guess it is. Yeah.
Well, of course, if you're in an interview, you flip this on its head and go, okay, well, the 5 things that we really need to know to be able to manage this program are these. And then you go, right, here's how like, none of these KPIs in isolation are any good. It's about, to be honest, it's what you did before. It's the specificity of them, saying, I'm going to do this for that thing. I think, I'm going to counter you there and say, mathematically, when you're on very, very large programs with large numbers of activities, actually tracking percent complete by duration is, on average, it technically works so long as you've not got long duration activities or handlebar activities, and so long as the number of live activities over the total number of activities is a very low number, because it's a fidelity thing, isn't it? Like, technically, you could just have a tick, which is the activity complete or is it not? That could actually just be a tick. And the percent complete is irrelevant. It's like, I actually don't care, because if I've got 100,000 activities and I know that 50% of them are ticked and 50% aren't, and all of them are generally about the same size, I'm like, screw it, it's 50% complete.
I have thousands of schedulers grabbing their pitchforks, getting ready to storm your castle, Greg. You're walking into dangerous territory, my friend.
I know.
I would agree. There is a piece to what you're saying that is true. My thought process, though, is if you're going through the process of sitting down with a group of people and you're updating a schedule and you have a wide range of activities that are, not all just 1 to 2 day activities, it makes sense to me for the person who's managing the work, who sees what's going on, to say, this is a 10-day activity, we're 30% complete. And be able to look at, well, this is a 10-day activity, it's 30% complete, but we're 50% through the duration. That, to me, is what's beneficial about potentially using a physical percent complete over a duration percent complete. Because the duration percent complete, you don't get any understanding of where that subject matter expert thinks the work is. So that's one to me where, but the longer I'm in this game, the more I realize for any sort of physical percent complete, any sort of progress tracking, you need a wide variety of techniques and capabilities to match the techniques and capabilities that are on your project. Because some people will be able to do that physical percent complete. Some people will be able to do, resource tracking and EVM. And some people, the work isn't as important. And like you said, probably you can get away with doing a duration percent, and you don't have to worry about that operational overhead you're creating by implementing this massively bureaucratic system for every single person on a project, which now we have 2 bands of people with pitchforks going to be coming after us, Greg, once they hear that, because lots of people want to set up one system, Lord of the Rings style, to rule them all.
That's a really key point, and I do know, like, this is the hill that a lot of people will die on. But actually, I'm just going to pull back and say here, there's a number of philosophies, and as you and I have been on hundreds of projects around the world, different people have different philosophies. On one extreme is what I call easy life project completion philosophy, which is I'll set up a set of rules. For example, no activity can be more than 5 days, something like that. So they've made things granular, and I only care if it's complete or not. I don't care about any work in between. I just care if it's complete or not. And what they've essentially done is set up a structure whereby you're tracking progress just by activity count. Really. Really. You could do a bit of weighted duration, but the variance in duration is so low.
between 2 and 4 days.
Exactly. And in that instance, it is, I've got an easy life because people just say it's complete or not, or the QA just tells me it's complete or not. But the level of information that I'm getting out of the system is low. I'm just getting when things are complete, and I'm only able to assess productivity from a kind of pseudo productivity KPI. It's not really productivity. It's just the duration match. Whereas you've got the other philosophy, which is I need to understand productivity, and this is a bottom up. So this is every basis of estimate has been built up with an estimation of established productivity rates, equipment availability factors, materials availability and delivery factors, all of these things, and you're going bottom up all the way up now. And that now, which philosophy works best? Well, the first philosophy generally only really works if you can actually break projects down into that level. You can create 50, 100,000 activities of that level and track them through. You need a volume to kind of smooth over the lumpiness. But as you go kind of backwards, if you want to be able to get in and understand the productivity of functions and start to put actions in place to improve performance, you'll need some more detailed information. Also, if you have smaller projects or projects with greater task variance, you're not going to be able to do that. So actually, there's I was thinking a while ago, could I create like a mathematical equation to kind of say on this spectrum what's the perfect thing? And theoretically you can, but there's a lot of gray zone. And I actually think that dependent on the experience of the scheduler listening to this, they will have naturally done projects of size and complexity which disproportionately positions them to prefer a certain philosophy. But this is getting very deep now. So what I'd say is,
I feel like thousands of schedulers were standing at your castle door, and they all had their pitchforks out, and then they're kind of like, "Oh, well, I'm kind of bored now. I think I'm just gonna go." Yeah. I think Greg talked me off the ledge. I think we're cool still. Let's go back to scheduling. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about. We've cruised through a couple of the classic metrics. Do you have anything in the bag that is non-standard, that is something interesting that people can use on their projects? What do you got in your metric toolkit?
Yeah, I got 3 that I use that I've never seen anyone use actually, and 2 of them are down to a reverse philosophy, and one of them is just something that I've just never seen people use. So I don't care if the project's on time, which sounds strange, but let me position. I don't care if
they
the
just
project...
they were walking away.
The pitchforks are like, they turn around and what? Oh. I don't care. I care about the tipping points of performance, as in, when's the business going to get paid, or when's the business going to need to pay a bill? These are businesses, and they're in the game of making profit. And those aren't generally smooth functions. They're like, okay, if we go past the end date, we pay liquidated damages. So it's like, cool, I care about that end date. That's the one. What I care about in that is, so one KPI is my minimum productivity. What is my minimum level of productivity that if I go below means that I die? I hit that and start. I know that if I continue at that pace, I'm going to start getting liquidated damages. And in the car, this is your minimum average speed. It's like, I'm doing this journey, I need to get there before 5 p.m. What's the minimum average speed I need to hit in order to get there for 5 p.m.? And if my average speed goes below, I know I need to do something fast. So that's number one, which is my minimum productivity. My second one is the equal, but for variance. What's the maximum variance I can have in my predictability? And variance being, for example, a standard deviation. So it's like, if I said something was going to take 5 days and one took 10 and one took 2, that's a massive range compared to one took 6 and one took 4. And when you're running the Monte Carlo simulations, they produce different results. The p positions fly all over the place. So I'd be like, what is the uncertainty range that gives me the p position that I need before I die? And I'd be tracking that too. And that's actually one that no one ever tracks that I ever see is uncertainty. And then the third one is just raw uncertainty. Like, what uncertainty am I actually outputting? What I've seen, my experience is in really big complex programs as opposed to lots of small simple programs. But on these really, really big complex programs, the two things that blow everything out of the water are actually uncertainty and change. Like, productivity, generally planners are very, very capable of putting in float within the program to account for levels of productivity. And managers are very capable of going into areas and increasing productivity for cost or whatever. But very few people I've seen are able to think about uncertainty and then go in and manage uncertainty out of a production operation. So I'd probably say those last two are the ones. Now, I've used those on lots and lots of programs, and it gives you a very, very early warning indicator that's hardly ever wrong of when something's going very, very off track.
That was where I was going to jump in, is that those metrics really shine a light early on, because what your minimum, like on the first metric, if you break this threshold, you're in trouble. A lot of metrics that we went over today, they don't ever really have that minimum threshold, or they have almost like a get out of jail free card to their minimal threshold where people can explain them away. That's actually a really good point overall, with the metrics. Setting them up with these key failure points at the beginning to say we need to pump the brakes and really dive in and understand these is super huge. I think we've talked about on the show before, this we don't have time for, but this like bleeds into automated governance, how you govern a project based on different KPIs and metrics. It's pretty interesting stuff. Well, folks, Greg has a final thought. I heard the sigh and the head lean. That is very familiar to a final thought.
I do head leans. My thought there was that actually, when I'm setting up KPIs for projects, each KPI has to be on something that I can control. People set up KPIs for ethereal things. So an ethereal thing would be total float over the total of the project or something like this. And I'm like, okay, that is an incredibly difficult thing to get my head around. And I can't directly control that thing. I have to do many things to control that thing. So they either set it up on ethereal concepts or concepts they can't control. And I'm like, actually, no. Every single KPI has to be an individual thing that I can control. And then, to be honest, the world takes care of itself after that. So of those two KPIs, one is productivity. I can control productivity because I can hire more people. I can do double shifts. I can educate the team. I can de-scope. I can do lots of things. And the other thing around variance is I can bring in operations management experts and say, make this more predictable. So everything has to be almost a very, very singular subset of actions that come off a KPI turning red. It shouldn't be a KPI turning red and then everyone in the management meeting sitting there going, do I care? Like, that's a terrible case. It should be KPIs turn red, immediately turn to page 26, pick from one of the 8 things.
Yeah.
It's like a recipe book.
That's exactly, and it's usually less do I care, more about, well, how do we go fix this? And they don't have a like a clear, hey, we're off in this direction and changing it. One thing before we jump off that we didn't cover is we didn't jump into operational metrics. And when you mentioned things you can control, if you're on a program and you're covering a small subset of work or a good sized subset of work, you may not be, as you mentioned, Greg, in that position to handle the total for the project, the big milestones of the project. And you can get some of these performance based metrics, operational based metrics. And we have to do a whole nother episode on this as well. Are people submitting their schedules on time? How much engagement do you have from your project managers? Are you getting your uploads in? Are the reports being done on time? That whole piece of it on the other side of scheduling, that's just what is your step-by-step functions, super huge to track KPIs on, because the more efficient you can get with the operation of the schedule, the more you can start looking at impactful stuff to do in the schedule. If you have I'll call it like a bleeding cycle, where by the time you get one update in, you're already doing the next updates, you've just turned yourself into an update function and you're not actually providing value and impact to the project. So there are many operational metrics I just mentioned, but I'd highly recommend people look at those for metrics and KPIs as well, because that's going to be able to help you shift into more impactful work. Well, folks, hope you enjoyed this week's episode on metrics. If you have any metrics that you enjoyed, please share them in the comments below. We'd love to see what everyone out there is doing in the world. So for us, from Beyond Deadlines, have a great week.